What were the Wars of the Roses? Imagine this. England in the 15th century, where the very symbol of royal power, the throne, is a game board, and the players are two powerful families locked in a deadly rivalry. These families were so bitter in their feud that their iconic symbols, a white rose and a red rose, would forever mark this turbulent period in history. But this wasn't just a quarrel over a crown. It was a bloody, twisting tale of ambition, betrayal, and enough backstabbing to make even the most complicated soap opera seem tame. Welcome to the Wars of the Roses. Welcome to the wars. Now, before we dive into the battles and the betrayals, the Wars of the Roses weren't just one war, but rather a series of bloody conflicts that took place between 1455 and 1487. They were fought between two rival branches of the same royal family, the House of Lancaster, whose emblem was a red rose, and the House of York, symbolized by, you guessed it, a white rose. The roots of this chaos go all the way back to the 14th century and a king named Edward III. He had many sons, which, while good for family gatherings, was bad for the future of England. You see, more sons meant more claims to the throne. When Edward III passed away, the throne eventually landed in the lap of his grandson, Richard II. But Richard wasn't exactly popular, and his reign came to a messy end when his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, from the House of Lancaster, overthrew him and crowned himself King Henry IV. You might think that's the end of it. Henry IV took the throne, and life went on. But this power grab created a lot of resentment, especially from the House of York, who believed their claim to the throne was just as valid, if not more so. The Yorkists bided their time, and tensions simmered beneath the surface for years. And just when England thought things couldn't get more unstable, in comes Henry VI, Henry IV's grandson. Now, Henry VI is a name you'll want to remember, but not for his impressive leadership skills. This guy wasn't exactly known for his strong rule. In fact, he was weak, indecisive, and prone to bouts of mental illness, which only added fuel to the already smoldering fire. His instability gave rise to factions, and before you know it, the Yorkists saw their chance. The first shots of the Wars of the Roses were fired in 1455 at the Battle of St. Albans. Picture it like a showdown between rival gang leaders, only instead of turf wars, they were fighting for the crown. Richard, Duke of York, was the leader of the Yorkists, and he had had enough of Henry VI's ineffective rule. He wanted to take control of the government, perhaps even the throne itself. At St. Albans, Richard's forces defeated the Lancastrians, and he captured Henry VI. But instead of taking the throne right then and there, Richard opted for a power-sharing arrangement, hoping to essentially rule through Henry. Well, that didn't last long. The Lancastrians weren't going to sit idly by and watch their king become a puppet, and soon enough, battles broke out across the country. For the next several years, it was a chaotic game of chess. Power would shift back and forth between the two sides like an incredibly bloody tug-of-war. One day, the Lancastrians were in control, and the next, the Yorkists would seize power. It was a constant back and forth, with families turning against one another, alliances being made and broken, and no one really knowing who would come out on top. The real turning point came in 1461, after the death of Richard, Duke of York. His son Edward picked up the mantle for the Yorkists. Now Edward was everything his father wasn't: young, charismatic, and a born leader. He was determined to put the Yorks in power once and for all. Edward scored a major victory at the Battle of Towton, which is considered the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. It was a freezing March day, and both sides knew this was a make-or-break moment. The Yorkists, under Edward, managed to outsmart the Lancastrians, who fled in disarray. Henry VI and his queen, the formidable Margaret of Anjou, went into hiding, and Edward was crowned King Edward IV. It seemed like the Yorks had won, but of course this wouldn't be the Wars of the Roses if the story ended there. While Edward was settling into his new role as king, the Lancastrians were plotting their comeback. Queen Margaret wasn't one to give up easily. She rallied her forces in the north, and with the help of foreign allies, she launched a series of rebellions against Edward. Things took an even more dramatic turn when Edward's own ally, the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker for his role in helping Edward rise to power, switched sides. Yes, you read that right. The man who had once been Edward's biggest supporter turned on him. Warwick joined forces with the Lancastrians and helped restore Henry VI to the throne in 1470. It was a stunning reversal. Edward was forced to flee the country, and Henry VI, weak and pliable as ever, found himself king again. But not for long. Edward IV wasn't the type to stay down for long. In 1471, he returned to England with an army, determined to take back the throne. And take it back he did, with a vengeance. In a series of swift and decisive battles, Edward crushed the Lancastrians once and for all. The battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury were the final nails in the Lancastrian coffin. Warwick, the Kingmaker, was killed in battle, and young Prince Edward, Henry VI's only son and heir, was slain as well. With no heirs left to carry on the Lancastrian line, Henry VI was quietly murdered in the Tower of London, likely on Edward's orders. With that, Edward IV was once again securely on the throne. Peace, at long last, seemed to have returned to England. But if you think that's where our story ends, hold on. There's one last twist. Edward IV's sudden death in 1483 threw the country into yet another crisis. His eldest son, Edward V, was just 12 years old, and in came Edward's brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Now, Richard had always been a loyal supporter of Edward IV, but when the opportunity presented itself, he seized it with both hands. He declared Edward V illegitimate, locked the young king and his brother in the Tower of London, and, wait for it, crowned himself King Richard III. The two young princes disappeared, presumed murdered, in what became one of history's greatest mysteries, the princes in the Tower. Richard's reign was short and filled with controversy. He wasn't exactly a popular king, and his questionable rise to power made him enemies left and right. It wasn't long before a new challenger appeared, Henry Tudor, a distant relative of the Lancastrian line. In 1485, Henry Tudor landed in England and marched to confront Richard III. At the Battle of Bosworth Field, Richard III was killed, marking the end of the Yorkist dynasty. Henry Tudor was crowned King Henry VII, and in a poetic twist, he married Elizabeth of York, uniting the warring families and creating the Tudor dynasty. The Wars of the Roses were finally over, and the red and white roses were combined to create the symbol of the new Tudor rose, representing the unity between the two houses. So, what's the takeaway from all this? The Wars of the Roses were about much more than just battles over the throne. They represented a time when power was constantly shifting, where loyalty was fleeting, and where England was forever changed. The country was left scarred by the constant fighting, and many of the great noble families were left in ruins. But from the ashes of these wars rose the Tudors, a dynasty that would lead England into one of its most iconic eras, one filled with powerful rulers like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. So next time you see a red or white rose, remember, those pretty little flowers were once symbols of a bloody battle for England's very soul. If you enjoyed this video, why not share your thoughts in the comments below? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating historical tales.